From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
President Joe Biden announces in a campaign video that he's running for re-election in 2024 as President Donald Trump again attacks his nearest rival, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Colin Levy. In a 3-minute video posted this morning, which begins with footage of the January 6th Capitol riot, President Biden says that he ran in 2020, arguing that it was a battle for the soul of America and that this battle is still raging. Listen to this.
But around the country, MAGA extremists are lining up to take on those bedrock freedoms, cutting Social Security that you paid for your entire life while cutting taxes for the very wealthy, dictating what health care decisions women can make, banning books, and telling people who they can love, all while making it more difficult for you to be able to vote.
Kim, what did you make of the president's announcement that he's running for a re-election?
It was really striking to me, Kyle, how much this felt like a repeat of 2020. Joe Biden is going to run against the jumbo, super, ultra, major, MAGA Republicans and suggest that the world is at risk of burning and falling to pieces if Republicans are allowed to take power again. Along the lines, if you looked at the ad, it was also the hodgepodge of outreach to certain interest groups that Democrats used in 2020 as well, too. There were references to how Republicans will take away your voting rights. This was an appeal to African American and minority voters. There was claims that Republicans were going to take away your Social Security. That's obviously an appeal to senior citizens. There was mixed in Joe Biden in a hard hat, old Scranton Joe. Again, this is part of the party's attempt to appeal to white working class voters. So it sounds as though the campaign here is to double down on what they did 4 years ago, ignore the reality of the last 4 years, just gloss over everything, claim the economy is great, that we are back on the world scene and things are better for a result of it. The country is better off. And then cross their fingers and hope that Donald Trump is the nominee.
That also struck me, Colin, that Biden and Trump are still locked in this embrace where the other relies on the other as a big part of his argument that he needs to stay in the Oval Office or get back into the Oval Office. But one of the things that is interesting about this is we are going to have a pretty robust competition, I think, on the Republican side of the aisle to get that nomination. And if Biden makes his argument for re-election all about, I'm the guy who can beat Donald Trump, look, I did it in 2020, I can do it again in 2024, where does that leave him if Donald Trump ends up not being the Republican nominee, if it ends up being Ron DeSantis or Tim Scott or Nikki Haley or Mike Pence? It seems to me that that takes much of the wind out of the president's sails if that is the basis for his reelection campaign.
Yeah, no question, Kyle. And I think he knows that. This is a calculated strategy on his part as well. I think that Democrats are calculating that Joe Biden is the guy who can beat Trump. If you have a different candidate up there, there's a whole different set of equations there. A lot of them have to do with age. The idea that a Republican could come in and say, I'm going to be the young guy who takes America forward and runs an optimistic campaign that's quite different from the campaigns that we've seen recently. And snapping back to the video for a second, this video announcement, I have to say I was really sort of stunned that it was done on a video at all. I thought that was really a very telling thing. It was obviously done because they wanted to eliminate the possibility of gaffes and be able to sort of micromanage that message as they were going to put it out. But it did so focus on all of these negative, scary things that Democrats want to talk about happening in America, as Kim said, from banning books and the abortion issue and all of these snapbacks to January 6th and MAGA Republicans. Well, okay, but you know what they didn't talk about? They didn't talk about any of the threats that are happening overseas. And I thought that was a really noticeable thing missing in this video. You've got threats from Russia. You've got them taking the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich hostage. They clearly are feeling confident that they can do that sort of thing. You've got China on the march, spying aggressively on America. There's a lot that the Biden administration needs to be doing and focusing Americans' attention on. And I was really disturbed that so much focus was on these internal domestic political battles.
On the point about President Biden's age, just as a reminder, by the time of the next inauguration in 2025, Biden will be 82, and at the end of a second term, if he indeed won one, he would be 86. And Kim, there is a significant amount of talk, I think, on the right that President Biden campaigned from his basement in 2020 because of the COVID pandemic. That allowed him to get away with that, and he can't get away with that sort of thing again. And so Republicans will be able to clearly make his age an issue in this campaign. And I'm not so sure about that, in part because President Biden now has the power of incumbency to aid a sort of front porch campaign. He can get on Air Force One and it will fly him at taxpayer expense across the country to some airport, and he'll hop out and give a relatively quick speech, hop back on, go back to the White House. And the question of whether he will debate anybody, it seems to me, is up in the air. Remember, Republicans pulled out of the quasi-official commission on presidential debates. And so that could be an excuse, if he wants, that Biden could use to say, well, we will only debate if the debates are run through this commission. And so you could end up in a position where he doesn't have any debates with the eventual Republican nominee.
Yeah, look, the power of incumbency is incredibly big. And you can bet that the Democratic team around Biden is going to be crafting an entire strategy whereby, as you say, he is using all the levers that are provided to him as a president to do these very scripted, informal campaign stops where he's also acting presidential. Maybe they're actually being done as a guise of an official trip from the White House, but they serve the dual purpose of putting him out there in the field in a sort of campaign type situation. He's also going to get a lot of obviously earned free media and from a press corps that absolutely adores him and will make all kinds of justifications and excuses for anything that doesn't go well. I think the debate point is really important. Republicans are going to need to have to think about this. I can understand why they pulled out of the Commission on Presidential Debates. There were a lot of problems in the past in the terms of who gets chosen to do the moderation, etc. But if he is indeed going to be the Democratic nominee, if he is not challenged by anybody on the left, and I still find that a jump ball, I still think there's a possibility there. But if he isn't, and he actually ends up being the nominee, this is going to be Republicans' best shot, especially as it'll be coming right up before the election. And I think Democrats here, just on this age point, are making a very big bet, because if it is Donald Trump, that's one thing, that's the rematch. But if it is anybody else on the Republican field, who by definition is going to be significantly younger, I think the Democrats are at big risk of him potentially losing purely on the age issue, purely on the contrast of a younger, more vibrant person versus a person who clearly is in some level of decline. At this point, I think Democrats would be crazy to put him out on the debate stage, and Republicans would be crazy to make that an easy situation for them to get away with.
Colin, I wonder if you agree with Kim on those points. And a couple more pieces I would throw in here is that this is the strategy that the White House has already been using, shielding President Biden. Here is a news story in the New York Times from just a few days ago. Biden has held the fewest news conferences since Reagan. At the top of it says, in the 100 years since Calvin Coolidge took office, only Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan held as few news conferences each year as the current occupant of the Oval Office. And that occasions some complaining from journalists, particularly journalists who are supposed to be at those news conferences when they're held. But it's not clear to me whether that is something the broader electorate cares a whole lot about. And another weakness, I think, for Biden is his overall approval rating, which is probably tied up in these questions among voters about his age. In the 538 average of polls, it is right now, it's 53.5% disapprove to 42.1% disapprove. And it has been relatively steady. He's been underwater basically since the botched withdrawal of Afghanistan in August of 2021. But it seems to me that whoever the Republican nominee is, if he or she wants to make an issue of that, one thing that could be done is to say that a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for President Kamala Harris. Presumably, she will be Biden's running mate again. And Colin, it was notable in this video that Biden put out this morning. There are several prominent clips of Kamala Harris walking and talking with the president. And to my eye, it's a clear effort to elevate her and get ahead of those kinds of attacks.
No question that he's trying to put her up as sort of a straight-up wingman here and to say that she's right there by his side. I'm not sure that anyone finds that particularly reassuring. I think, to get back to your other point, though, too, Kyle, I think it's really important here going into these debates and going into this campaign. As you say, he has done so few news conferences, but he's going to need to defend his record. The video he put out was sort of trying to make it, again, all about what evils may lurk from the Republicans, but he's going to have to answer a lot of questions about his own agenda and the things that he's done for progressives. I think we have to remember one of the reasons that Democrats like Joe Biden so much is that because he's got this kind of older, avuncular thing, as Kim said, the sort of Scranton Joe quality, he can give off this aura of being a moderate. And in fact, he has pushed through a very progressive agenda. He's been very aggressive on climate. He's had pushed enormous numbers of regulations through the administrative agencies. And he needs to answer questions about those things and defend that. And he needs to answer questions from the professional press. I don't care how many quick question and answer sessions he does on Air Force One. He needs to sit down and face the questions that the American people want to hear and face them from journalists who are trained to ask those tough questions. So I think it really is a concern if he's not willing, if they're going to try to shield him from the debate stage and run this front porch campaign. I think it's going to make him look weaker and weaker. And, already you had 26% of Americans who thought he should run for reelection and 70% who said he shouldn't. So he's going to have to sort of disprove those major doubts going forward.
Kim, but given those kind of poll numbers, majorities of voters and sometimes even majorities of Democrats saying they want a different candidate in 2024, why do you think that Biden has been so successful in clearing this field? He appears to have only token opposition in the primaries. Where are all of these ambitious young Democrats who should see this as an opportunity for promotion? I would cite a couple people who ran in the 2020 primaries, Senator Cory Booker, Senator Michael Bennet, Senator Amy Klobuchar, or even some of these governors that have gained prominence since, Gavin Newsom in California, Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. Why is it that nobody seems willing to take a run at Joe Biden?
One thing I would say, and I would give the Biden team enormous props for this. I'm not always very appreciative of what they do, but they have been magnificent about projecting strength from this White House. And they got a big assist last year during the midterms when the president defied some of those polling expectations, the general view of how bad a thumping Democrats were going to get. They still lost the House, but it was fewer defeats than had been expected. And the White House right out the door came out with a memo talking about how this was a success of the Biden agenda. You've heard them talking nonstop about the legislation they managed to get through last year and the year before that, everything from the Inflation Reduction Act to the infrastructure bill. So they very much tried to project a position of strength. And I think that has been somewhat successful in holding off some would-be aspirants. I think the other thing, though, is that the party has somehow lulled itself into the belief that Trump is going to be the nominee and that Biden is the only one who can beat him. And interestingly, there were some press reports this week suggesting that this is certainly something Biden believes. There was some titter that he had been talking to friends and noted that he had considered stepping aside for Kamala Harris, but didn't think that she could beat Donald Trump. She didn't have the ability to beat Donald Trump. Now, I think that's a worthy debate to be had, but also somewhat striking to me, this notion, because I don't think it's correct, that there's nobody else in the Democratic Party that would have the ability to beat Donald Trump. I certainly think there are some problems with some of the progressives that are out there, but they could potentially get somebody that tried to sort of straddle the moderate wing of the the party as well, too, if they were to run against him for the nomination. It's not, to me, so certain that he is the only guy, but this is how he's managed to do it so far, is there's this belief in the party that he is good for them, that he can both get a victory against Donald Trump, but all wings tend to sort of like him, especially progressives, because they know that they can get him to do exactly what they want.